Boise in Sandusky, WVMS Sandusky at 89.5 FM. Time is 1 o'clock, and that means that coming up next for the next 55 minutes is a Midday Connection. Welcome to Midday Connection, a positive approach to biblical living in the 90s. We deal with a variety of relational issues, and to introduce today's topic, here's Andrea Fabry.
Thank you, Wayne. Today, part 2 in our 2-day series on sexual abuse, and hopefully you were able to hear the story of Jim and Sally Conway yesterday, parents who've had to deal with the anger and pain of their daughter Becky's abuse. Becky was there as well. If that program triggered questions for you, today is our follow-up to that. Dr. Dan Allender is with us. He's live in our Chicago studio. Our phone number, 312-329-4460. Dan is a psychologist on the faculty of Colorado Christian University outside of Denver. He's the author of Bold Love, as well as The Wounded Heart, Hope for Adult Victims of Childhood Sexual Abuse, both published by NAV Press. Great to have you in Chicago, Dan.
Thank you, Andrea. Good to be with you.
Clearly, we're talking to people across this country who have been affected by sexual abuse to one degree or another. The statistics are staggering. Why?
Well, it's just a great question. And quick reference back to the program that you had on yesterday. I just thought it was so wonderfully courageous of Jim and Sally and Becky to share their hearts about the realities of abuse being in a pastor's family, in anyone's family. The fact is, abuse is so common and so prevalent, we have to come to the conclusion that someone is really behind it. Someone's really engaged in making this an issue for so many people. The figures would seem to indicate that minimally, very conservatively, we're looking at 1 out of every 3 women, and probably in the range of 1 out of every 4 men. And again, I say conservative, meaning the figures are undoubtedly much higher than that.
We talked yesterday about the fact that for Jim and Sally and Becky, we were talking 20 years or more, and the fact that it wasn't talked about, kids didn't know that, and yet, in your opinion, are we still kind of quiet on this?
Oh, it's just a gross cover-up in a culture, even a culture like ours, where it is not that uncommon to tune into any TV show to hear something of those realities. But if I can bore you with a little bit of history, back in 1893, Freud made a presentation to the Vienna Medical Society where he shared the fact that 14 out of 15 of his patients had a history of past sexual abuse. The Vienna Medical Society literally erupted in the middle of his lecture in laughter and mockery. Within 2 years, he came up with an entire theoretical framework that put the blame for abuse not on the parent, but on the child's fantasies. Somehow the child actually concocted the idea that they had been abused because of certain struggles that they felt toward their own parents sexually. Well, for them, nearly, 60, 70, 80 years, we've had a culture and a society that has chosen to blame the child, the victim, rather than facing the high incidence and the real damage of abuse.
We're here to face it today, and we hope you will participate. If this is an issue, a struggle for you, 312-329-4460 is our phone number. Feel free to remain anonymous if you'd like, 312-329-4460. We will take your name and number and then call you back. Dr. Dan Allender today on Midday Connection.
Now the Global Prayer Digest lets you hear how airplanes and schools illustrate the compassion of Jesus Christ. The CEO of Mission Aviation Fellowship, Max Myers, says a young man in Papua New Guinea reminded him of a key moment. Max says the man used these words.
You let me unload the parcels from your plane. I saw you every week as you came in. Without you and without MAF, without that aeroplane, my school couldn't have existed. I would not have been educated. I would not have found Christ.
The young man now works for the government of Papua New Guinea. MAF flies key personnel and vital supplies in countries where other transportation is difficult or impossible. Explore missions in the air with a free copy of the magazine, Lifelink. Call 1-800-2222-MAF. 1-800-2222-MAF. That's F as in fellowship.
Midday Connection. Here's Andrea Fabry.
Today, the healing process when there has been sexual abuse. It may be that you were abused as a child. It may be that one or more of your children have been abused. And it may be that you, in fact, have been a perpetrator and are listening today. If so, we encourage you to stick listening and participate if you so choose. We hope you will gain new insight and encouragement from today's program with Dr. Dan Allender, one of the country's foremost experts, I guess I want to say, in this whole area of sexual abuse. He's written on the subject. His book is titled The Wounded Heart. He's also written Bold Love, and both published by NAV Press. And you alluded, Dan, to the fact that surely someone has to be behind this because there's such a prevalence. So you made the allusion. Let's talk about it.
Well, I think it's very simple to say that I think the one behind the great damage and abuse is the evil one, the Satan himself. And why? Satan's primary desire is to destroy the glory of God. He cannot destroy God and his glory, but he can go after that which is a derivative reflection of the glory of God, which is us and our lives. So why would he do that? Why would he go after the glory within us? Well, ultimately to harm God, but doing so through us. And how does abuse harm us? How does it destroy, in one sense, what Psalm 8 indicates? We bear God's glory. I think in one very simple way, abuse destroys faith, hope, and love, or at least it shatters it or stains it. Because the abuser, in most cases, 9 out of 10 times, knows the victim beforehand and uses relationship with the victim to draw them into a relationship prior to the abuse, in which case they have used trust. They have made faith that much more difficult. For the abuse victim to trust another person, to trust the Lord, now has been stained even more by the reality of the damage. Further, I think hope is somehow damaged or stained. There's a reality to which dreams, desires, now feel dangerous, now feel so foolish and dangerous to have. It is so common, and I can't underscore this more, it is so common for an abuse victim to feel like her own desires or his own desires mock him. Therefore, it's better to shut down and just live, in one sense, a compliant, complacent life, just going on and the routines of life. And that's why the word survivor, just get by, is such a tragic word in many ways.
Stay numb. I mean, yes.
That's the key word. Yeah. Somehow faith and hope, which are the energizers of love, we distance ourselves from. Faith and dangerous toward hope. Therefore, with love, as I go back to that word, we just stay numb and complacent and get by, a sort of peace at any cost. And Jim and Sally alluded to the fact that it's so easy to live with a cover-up, to live with just kind of get by, make things nice, have a nice meal, have a pleasant time, but don't deal with the hardcore realities. That's the great tension for many who have been abused.
It's so painful and so scary, though, to enter into that ground. I mean, it is easier. We need to acknowledge, isn't it, to just stay and go along.
And yet, isn't it wonderful that, one sense, God's Spirit continues to work in us, prompting memories, in Becky's case, to come to the surface some 20 years after the abuse occurred, to have a sense of dis-ease. The fact that, as she put it yesterday, that there were struggles in a relationship with her husband, with her children. She had the integrity to face her life wasn't as she desired. That's kind of the prodigal's basis of returning to the Father, to say, I am not really happy with living where I am and existing as I'm existing. And so the integrity to say, I'm not happy, many times the Spirit prompts that to begin the process of facing what's in us and outside of us.
I feel strongly that some listening today are just beginning that process. Some are further along and still struggling, and you always hunger for more encouragement because the walk is so tough sometimes. But for the person who's just on the threshold, Dan, and they've realized, I have to feel that yesterday, hearing Becky's story, others identified and thought maybe, and now what do you say to them to even begin to deal with this?
Oh, can I go back to their program to say there are two things that I thought were so important to underline. First of all, they all made at least a remark along the lines of try to give up the fantasy that somehow in this life you're going to heal it, that you're going to go through a therapeutic process or a process of prayer or thinking things through with the Lord, and somehow it's going to come to be a manageable package which now we can walk away from. It's been healed. No problem. That's a very false view of the spiritual life as well as the life of the heart and soul in a fallen world. So give up Just give up the hope, the false hope, that somehow you can get rid of it. Now, that could cause some of our listeners to feel a certain despair, like, are you saying there's no hope? And the answer is, oh no, there's a great hope that the damage can be used. I'm just suggesting it can't be healed in a final sense until the Lord restores us in heaven.
Well, it was so amazing to me that partway through the program we found out Becky was an amputee. Well, her leg will never be back. I mean, that was a perfect analogy, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think at one point she made the remark, or someone made the remark, that in many ways, in comparison to losing her leg, which I find incredible thought to say that in comparison, the damage of abuse is worlds worse because it cuts to the core of so many parts of our relationship with God, with others. And I think that's an important point to hear. Don't try to heal it. Try to enter into it. So the second thing of don't do is don't flee from it. Don't make the presumption that somehow God is not big enough to deal with the issues that are going on inside of you. So if you take those two options, don't try to heal it, but don't flee from it. Now, what are you left with?
Well,
well, I know it's going to sound too quick, but I really do believe we as a Christian culture have lost the importance of struggling with God. We have come to somehow assume that we're to surrender to God, but the very notion of what it means to surrender implies there's a prior fight or a prior battle or war. Or if we think there might be with God a fight, a battle, or a war, we often presume it's a one-time or maybe a two-time shot. Once that's over, then now trust is full, you simply surrender to God. No, it's cyclical in the sense of almost every day, maybe every week and every month and every year, there will be battles of the soul where you cannot surrender unless you fight. And that takes me to Jeremiah 20. A passage where I think a victim of abuse needs to go to Jeremiah 20 and stay in it for a time as they think through Jeremiah's struggle of feeling that God betrayed him and that God let him down and God allowed harm to come that seemed so unlike what God promised in Jeremiah chapter 1, which was, I'll protect you. Then by Jeremiah 20, he's been harmed, he's been persecuted, he's been hung in a dung pit, he's been mocked and hated, he's been abused. Now, what does Jeremiah say? In Jeremiah 20, he starts off by saying, I feel deceived by you, and I feel overwhelmed. And those two words are strong words that indicate, I'm really not happy with you, God. Yet it's the struggle that opens up in verse 7, Jeremiah 20, verse 7, where Jeremiah says, I've tried to shut you out, but you burn like a fire in my heart. That's what an abuse victim needs to do. Fight with God, struggle with where he was. Why did he allow the abuse? Why did he allow your sister to not be abused and you to be abused? Now, what are you to do with that? Don't come to quick solutions. Don't come to easy steps. Be willing to enter into the battle. And there's the potential where you're going to begin to find the Spirit lighting the fire within you. And the fire of what? What Peter says in 1 Peter 1:8. He's again dealing with persecution, suffering, the fact that the Christian community is being harmed. And what he says so profoundly is, though you've never seen God, you love him. And though you've not seen him now, you believe in him. Well, those are two strong phrases. That's what I think Jeremiah is getting to in terms of the fire. Oh, I'm angry at you, God, but I love you. And I don't know what you're doing in my life, but I believe in you. And when those two things are there, I love you, I believe in you, then there's the potential, real potential for the damage of abuse to be looked at from Joseph's standpoint of you meant it for ill, for evil, but God meant it for good.
We have an anonymous caller in Chicago. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. My question is, my child was abused in the neighborhood by a man, and she implicated several other children as having been there, and we brought this out in the neighborhood, and now she's being victimized all over again by the neighborhood. They're saying that their children were not involved. They told one of their kids, you weren't there, this was just something that you were told. And I don't know how to handle the neighborhood. We're getting counseling for our child, but I just don't know how to handle the denial going on in the neighborhood.
I wish there were a quick answer, other than to say, continue to protect your child, make sure that those children that were particularly involved in the abuse are not permitted in the context of your home or in a place where your daughter, I assume, can be abused again. That's obvious, but let me say one more thing.
The children that were abused, you're saying not to have them by her? Or the person that abused her?
No, the person who abused her.
Yes, he's removed from the neighborhood.
And then the question of what to do with those other children, I think, again, at a way of saying, bring it into prayer, bring it into conversation, that you believe your daughter, and that you grieve for your daughter in terms of the ongoing, and I would use, frankly, the word persecution. And if she's old enough, I would talk with her about what the scriptures talk about with regard to persecution, that righteousness, that beauty draws forth hatred. I think it's one of the concepts that we need to teach our children, that real beauty is hated in this world. Now, cheapened beauty, that is things that you could see on a TV or in some journalistic context of what is kind of put forth as beauty, well, that's sort of adored to some degree, but true beauty of the heart is hated. Let her understand that she reflects something of God, therefore something within her is hated by the other kids. Confirm, support.
It's the kids, it's the parents.
The parents.
Well, but it's going to be both. If it's in the parents, it's going to be in the kids. And so, again, what I'm suggesting is, at one sense, surround your child with prayer and understanding and conversation. Then second, live before the other parents in a way that surprises them. That's one of the things that I think is most called for by Christians, is a surprising life that does not take retaliation, but on the other hand, has a certain freedom and ease of passion that's able to speak in a way to the other parents. When you see them on the street, don't pull away. The natural thing would be to pull away. The natural thing would be to want to say a clipped word, but surprise them with the quality of your kindness toward them, even though they have done great damage to you and to your child.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for calling. I'm glad you did, because it brings out, the circumstances are so different for everybody, but ultimately you're kind of called to a lonely road, aren't you? People around you not necessarily are going to support you in your healing.
And it's so hard, and I don't mean to be unkind to that last caller, but wake up to the fact that life is a tragedy. And as Oswald Chambers put it, you'll not grow in the Christian life until you face the fact that life is more essentially tragic than it is predictable. We really want a predictable, pleasant, nice green grass, white picket fence life. And at one level, if you enjoy it. But know that the world is against you. The flesh is against you. The evil one is against you. Now, in the context of a war, what would your stance be in dealing with the great harm that comes?
Take a break. 312-329-4460. We are talking about healing from sexual abuse. We welcome your calls at 312-329-4460. Dr. Dan Allender, our guest today.
This is Katie Williams, and on behalf of the Women's Committee for the Billy Graham Crusade, I would like to invite you to come to the Women's Winterfest, to be held at the Music Hall in Cleveland, Friday, February 25th at 7:30 p.m., or the Chapel in Akron at 9:30 a.m. on Saturday, February 26th. Our speaker will be Bonnie Barrows Thomas, Bible teacher, seminar and retreat leader, and daughter of Cliff Barrows. And the music will be provided by Babby Mason, a recording artist. Come and bring a guest. It will bring encouragement and a challenge to our church women, and an opportunity to hear the gospel message for your unchurched guests. Admission is free. Again, that's Friday evening at 7:30 at the Music Hall in Cleveland, or the Chapel in Akron at 9:30 a.m. on Saturday, February 26th. I hope to see you all there.
Are you thinking of working for Christian ministry, but you don't know where to begin? Take that first step and start with Inter Cristo. Inter Cristo has been helping Christians integrate their faith with their employment for over 25 years. They will match your skills, education, and background with current job openings throughout the United States and overseas. Call Inter Cristo today at 1-800-426-1342. That's 1-800-426-1342.
Dr. Dan Allender, our guest today, he's in Chicago for his Bold Love Seminar. For those of you in the Chicago area, he will be at Winnetka Bible Church tomorrow, and you can call the church if you'd like to know more. And upcoming, we'll tell you about other seminars, one on sexual abuse. He does travel around the country doing these seminars, 2 seminars both that you do, right? Bold Love and Sexual Abuse. We have another anonymous caller in East Moline. Hi.
Hi. I was abused when I was 10 years old by an uncle who was babysitting. He was only 16 years old. And my parents came home in the middle of it, thank God. And so it didn't go as far as it could have. But he told me not to tell, and I didn't tell. And my parents talked to me, my mother by herself afterwards, and here it is almost 30 years after the event, and I'm plagued by having lied to my parents that I never told them the truth about this. And this uncle of mine has gone on in life, and he got saved, and he has a happy marriage, and he's a minister at a youth camp now, full-time ministry. And I feel so guilty because I never told, and I fear that if he hasn't gotten help with this problem, that he could be abusing children at the Bible youth camp. And I don't know how to handle this situation.
Well, if there was any way in the world to say to you, give yourself grace with regard to the issue of a lie, I would not put that in the context of a word lie. I would put that in the context of the word terror. And that is that you were typically, so typical for the abuser to put the abuse victim in a position of great threat, physical, relational, psychological threat. And so, in one sense, you were responding, in one sense, to the weight of the damage that was going on. So, if that's possible to cast that out of your language and your thought, please allow these comments to do so. But then the second issue that you've brought up has to do with what is the calling you may have in this man's life? The fact he's a minister, the fact that there's some heart for God. My thought is, well, that's wonderful, because it opens the door to the fact that man can't want to live in a way inconsistent with what God desires, which is reconciliation. And there's sin he has not gone to you to confess and to ask forgiveness for, and to deal with the context of what is the damage in your own life. Perpetrators have, Christian perpetrators particularly, have great potential to do good by bringing the issue to the forefront, by asking for forgiveness, but doing a whole lot more than that, and that is acknowledging the damage in such a way that it's not viewed as, well, now that I've asked forgiveness, now it's a past issue, let's just roll on, get on, and ignore it. No, let's deal with the damage in terms of what it did to you as a person, what it did to your relationships, what it's done to the whole family. So I would ask you to pray in terms of, does God really want you to open the door to this? In part, it may be that God really intends for you to deal with many of these issues with a friend, with a counselor, with a pastor, and then open the door eventually to bringing this issue to bear in this gentleman's life for the potential of reconciliation and for God to grow him more in the direction that he desires.
So she would start by, if it comes to this, talking to the uncle before her parents would, I know there's no hard and fast rule,
I personally think that you begin by seeking some form of prayer, conversation, and thought. And that's why before you do anything, just talk to somebody for some period of time, and not just a one-shot, one-meal type thing. I mean a more regular process of saying, let's take this seriously. Then, in that context, I really believe God will work in a way that draws her heart to say, I really want to honor this man. I'm not wanting to get him back. I want to honor him, to give him the chance to deal with those issues so that he could become more of what God intended. Then I think it's possible to open the door to say, is it appropriate to bring that up in the context of a relationship with her parents? Not because she lied, not because somehow she needs to come clean with that, but far more, are there issues in her parents' life that she would like to bring up so that she has a chance to in one sense, help them grow toward the mark of Christ within them?
Does that help?
Yes, it does. It really does. I have a 5-year-old son, and in light of the conversation yesterday, I have tried for several years now to let him know that it's not right for anyone to touch his private parts, and if they do, they'll tell him not to tell me, but it's okay for him to tell me. And I just had a strong impulse lately to tell him, I know, because I went through it when I was a little girl, how they'll try to convince you not to say something. But then again, I fear telling him that because he may say something to his grandparents about it. And so, what do you think about telling a child that you went through something
Good question.
like that?
I think overall, again, I wish there were answers for anything. But bottom line, I think my suggestion is hold off on that until the child is much older, and that is perhaps mid-adolescence or older adolescence, because the child's not going to be able to internalize that, to be helped by it. It'll be more either a curiosity or something weird about a parent. And usually parents have enough weird things that they don't need to add things like that at that age. You don't need to tell him that in order for the data to have gotten across. And the fact that you've done some very wise things with regard to alerting him, as we should be alerting all our children. They own their body before God. And then the second issue that Jim and Sally brought up is create a context where your child can come to you and let them know they'll be threatened if they are abused in some other context.
Okay, very good. I appreciate your help.
I guess my question to you is, have you talked to anybody else?
Yes,
Okay.
I have talked to a Christian counselor about it, but it's just been recently that I have the side issue of fearing this man could be continuing the behavior.
Right.
Very legitimate. It's a very legitimate concern. And unfortunately, you can't say because someone abused someone at age 16 that they're going necessarily, for sure, on. But it's a legitimate concern that I think should cause you, not so much because of that alone. He may be abusing, I need to bring this up, but far more, this man has not addressed a major flaw in terms of a relationship in his life. Let him have that opportunity.
All right, I'm glad you called.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We have a caller next, and we don't have time before the break to go to her, but let me just state her question as best as I can. If you haven't told your spouse you were abused, that will come in the way somehow of a relationship. What do you say?
Oh, boy. I think one of the first questions would be, what's the nature of the relationship? There are a lot of times where abuse victims, and I'm going to put it in a way that sounds too strong, but many times choose a partner who they don't need to move toward in terms of intimacy and faith, in terms of desire and hope. They choose a partner where they can live numb. They can live dead. And that's why so many abuse victims end up in abusive relationships with an angry, cold, many times a mean partner who, if they're not physically or sexually cruel, in other ways just choose not to invite a level of beauty and tenderness that can exist in a marriage. So part of the problem is many times there's replication. There's a certain redoing of re-entry into another abusive relationship. So I don't immediately say to a marriage partner, you need to share that past abuse with your partner until I have a better idea of the nature of that relationship, because many times the sharing of the data will only evoke even more abuse. So we need to think that through before we offer a quick answer.
Dr. Dan Allender is our guest. This is part 2 in a 2-day series on healing from sexual abuse. And our phone number, 312-329-8010. We will continue in 2 minutes here along the Moody Broadcasting Network.
Looking at church and other ministry-related activities today on Calendar Focus. This is an invitation to choir singers and instrumentalists to join the Perry Community Choir and Orchestra for their Easter cantata presentation, Calvary's Love, that will be held March 26th and 27th at the E.E. Goodman Theater. Choir rehearsals began on Sunday, January 30th at 2:30 p.m., and the orchestra rehearsals will begin Sunday, February the 27th at 1 p.m. If you'd like further information, call Don Densmore at 259-3218, 259-3218. A festival of Christian music will be held at the Fairmont Performing Arts Center at 8400 Fairmont Boulevard in Russell on Saturday evening, February the 19th at 7:30. This is a Christian music service held the third Saturday of every month, and music is performed by ministers from several Christian denominations, including traditional, old hymns, original music, and sing-along. There is no admission charge and no child care. For more information, call Terry or Amy at 338-3373. And a women's conference is going to take place on Saturday, March 5th at the Christian Alliance Church in Willard from 8:30 a.m. to 4:15 p.m. Speaker will be Jacquet Elliott and soloist Judy Chenoweth. There will be several mini sessions. There is a cost for this women's conference, and if you'd like more information or to register, call area code 419-935-6281. That's area code 419-935-6281.
today's broadcast, or if you missed yesterday's, believe me, it would be worth hearing it. I know we are making a lot of references to it. There was a lot of sharing, honest sharing, a lot of content, and both programs would benefit you as well as to offer to someone you know who's struggling through this. The Moody Cassette Ministry is the place to call, 312-329-8010. That's 312-329-8010, the Moody Cassette Ministry, for copies of both today and tomorrow. Looking ahead to next week, Monday, Dan's associate there at Colorado Christian University, Dr. Larry, the last name would be?
Let's see, Lobster?
Yeah, crap, yeah, talks about the marriage relationship. Tuesday, Austin Pryor takes your investment questions. Wednesday, Dr. Robbie Zacharias concludes our two-part series on Christ, art, and the media. Thursday, Dr. Kevin Lehman and Randy Carlson, the perfectionist child. And 1 week from today, the fascinating story of one woman's journey from jail to freedom in Christ. Iris Blue will be our guest. Again, Dr. Dan Allender, our guest today, and we'll go to our next anonymous caller there in WCRF listening area. Hi.
Hi, Andrea.
Yes.
Hi. My background is similar to the other lady that just talked. I was 14, and I spent the summer with an aunt and uncle. And every night when I was asleep, I was awakened by this uncle. Now, he never penetrated me. However, there was much molesting going on and fondling. And I sort of put that out of my mind for a long time because I felt like it was my fault. I would be blamed if anyone ever found out. And I've been married to a wonderful, great guy for over 20 years. And I've never shared it with him because I don't want him... I guess I never want him knowing when we would meet with his aunt and uncle, knowing what he did to me. And I guess my question is, I think about this every day of my life. There isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't think about what this guy did to me. And is it too late to share this with my husband, or will he think I'm some kind of a nut? Sharing this now?
It's a fair question to ask. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, and I'll trust your words entirely, that the relationship with your husband is just wonderful.
It is. You cannot. I have friends that tell me when I'm finished with him, they like to have him.
Well,
he is a great guy.
Therefore, there's no way in the world he's going to dismiss your legitimate struggle. If it's an ongoing issue at the level that you think about it every single day, then there's an ambivalence in you. There's a sense of feeling still to this day that there was a part of you responsible. What I talk about in The Wounded Heart is the whole notion of shame that comes because there was some sense, usually, of arousal at some level. Relationally, or physically, sensually, or sexually. There was some sense of pleasure. It's not unusual for the victim of abuse to feel some pleasure, and as a consequence feel like, did I want it? No, I didn't. I hated it, but yet there was part of me that enjoyed it. And so there's great shame for the abuse victim that spreads into her sense of gender, her sexuality, her relationships, in one sense, the entirety of her existence, including a relationship with the Lord. And for you to somehow think that it would be illegitimate for you to bring that up, that is, in one sense, a staining definition of what happened to your heart before God and before others. I would suggest very strongly that you pray and allow God to open the door to you sharing with your husband so that he has a clearer idea of what happened. But more than that, more than merely sharing the fact, I'd want him and you to pick up a book or two, go to a seminar or two, be in a position where you don't just dismiss it together, where you in fact explore it together so that you have some sense of how the tentacles of this past damage may have leaked into various parts of your life.
Well, I was in my late 20s when I started realizing what had happened to me or remembering. And I always felt like, well, if I really do, I just give it to the Lord. He'll take care of it. He'll take care of it, because in my heart, I forgive this man. I really do. But I always felt like, well, if I give it to the Lord, he'll deal with him and he'll take care of it. And I don't know that that's ever happened.
If you recall Jim's remark yesterday in the tape, and he said, if you put a nail in a tree and then take it out, the tree's still there, but it's going to be scarred. And we have to, as Christians, honestly face the fact that there are scars that the Lord will one day in heaven restore. But there are scars today which, no matter how deeply you pursue God, will still be there. But as we were saying more earlier, there's a potential for those scars to deepen your passion of struggle with God that deepens your faith in him. And it's possible for those scars to deepen your passion of hatred for evil, therefore wanting to live with love toward others much more profoundly and much more clearly. So I would suggest to you, open the door and let's see what God does in terms of bringing these issues to the forefront for both you and your husband to struggle with.
And you have opened the door by calling, so
Yeah,
thanks.
That's great. Thank
All right,
you for
good.
taking my call.
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
Bye-bye.
Another anonymous caller in WCRF listening area. Hi.
Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
sir, you're on the air.
All right. Should I state my point?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Essentially, number one, I'll start out by saying I am an accused person. And there's no question that there has been a tremendous amount of sexual abuse of children. My point is that there's two ways of looking at it when somebody comes out with this information. The difference being a child that remembers or never has forgotten what has existed, versus in other cases where a person 10, 20, 30 years later in life is not feeling right about themselves, is concerned why is these feelings. They could be depression, it could be not achieving some of life's expectations, etc. But seeks therapy or reading in books, what is the reason for this? And in the essence of this, it comes out through therapy usually, that they have been led to believe that they were sexually abused as a child.
Right. And how would you like me to respond to, do you have a question or how?
Well, yes, my question is, essentially, as I've been listening today, and I did not hear your program yesterday, it's almost assumed that anybody that is accusing that this has happened, how are we to differentiate between where it happened or didn't happen and be aware of the fact that there are people being led to believe? They're not lying. Understand that. They're not lying that they were sexually abused, but through certain therapy, certain types of therapists, not necessarily all of them by any means, that they come to believe they were and make an accusation that is also very terrible from the other end if you're on the receiving end.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of people in this category. You're probably aware and have heard of this before, and there is one group that tends to bind together to try to get out information about this. I'm not speaking for them.
Right.
I'm speaking for them.
And let me put off part of your issue in terms of what is often called the false memory syndrome. But let me respond to two things that you brought up. First of all, I think the evil one is quite willing to gain the destruction of the glory of God through abuse, or to flip to the other side to create accusations that are inaccurate. And many times there is a therapeutic modality or therapeutic orientation that makes the presumption that any struggle is related to past trauma, and therefore you cannot remove the current struggles in one's life until you get to this unearthing of the past damage. And I don't think that's accurate from a biblical perspective whatsoever. I try to take a road in the wounded heart that says the real route to change ultimately is not memory healing, not somehow an unearthing of memories, but the real route to change is ultimately, strange as it may sound, repentance. Repentance of the past abuse? Oh, no. A victim's never to repent of having been victimized. But there's something in the heart of every one of us, and Oswald Chambers put it this way, that the core of all sin, the real core of all sin, is doubt in the goodness of God. And so the events of abuse simply provide a context for saying God's not good. If you've not been abused, you still struggle with that same question. Is God good? And that's that clenched fist of saying, I will not have faith, I will not have hope, I will not live with love. So that's where I work toward as I work with victims of abuse, is yes, allowing memories to come. And we must, the second point I want to underline, is that it is extremely common for an abuse victim to not remember, to dissociate, to cut away from memory any of those past events and the feelings associated with them, for then 20, 30 years later, for things to begin percolating to the system, to the forefront. One of the things I have great difficulty with is a victim who says, I have the impression you abused me therefore I'm going to say you abuse me. I think it's far better for a victim to say, I have strong feelings, but nevertheless I have no discrete, clear memories of the past abuse. And a therapist who works toward trying to, in one sense, unearth those as the primary work of change, I think has taken an unbiblical system, an unbiblical approach to the real change of the heart. So, again, we have no basis to validate whether you did or didn't. But I do hope that you're willing to honor God by allowing this event to break you, to continue to break you, to continue to draw you to be more and more a man of God.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and but I am essentially saying that to go in, for somebody to go into therapy seeking a reason with no idea of sexual abuse being a problem way back and come out with this is a question that should surely be addressed and looked into to a degree.
Oh, absolutely.
Very hard to be on a receiving end of something, and I'm sure you've heard this statement. How do you defend yourself against something that you didn't do? There's no way a clear conscience and a belief of God is your only outlet on this matter. But in the meantime, the problem exists. And it isn't only the thing to remember. This isn't only between an accuser and accused. It gets to be a tremendous family problem.
Absolutely.
And I've heard it said that for every accusation, there's 10 or 20 people in the general family circle that are drawn into a very serious and hopeless, almost what seems to be a hopeless situation. And so it isn't a matter between just two people. And as I say, by all means, the people that are making these accusations, and I'm again talking of where it's a repressed memory, it's very important to realize that I would never say they're lying. They really believe it. And it's a very hard thing for those surrounding these people when they have great faith and trust in that particular person to say, well, gee, if they're saying this, it must have happened. And there are bring across the point.
Right. There are two sides, and the side one, I couldn't agree with you more, and that is the evil one will gain his victory in any way he desires, and he'll flip-flop to both sides. The other side is that it is absolutely common for those memories to be, if you will, repressed or dissociated, and we can't ignore the fact that in a therapeutic context, they're going to come forth. They're going to come forth in the way where they come bubbling one little part and then another little part. All I'm saying is we really need to reevaluate what is the change process in the therapeutic community. What's the core to change? It's not the recovery of memories. It's a heart willing to repent.
Caller, I'm glad you raised the questions you did. We need to take a break. We'll be right back.
The old expression is still true. If you fail to plan, it's like planning to fail. Hi, I'm Bob Williams. For some 2 years now, I've had the privilege of representing Moody Bible Institute here in the WCRF area. Over and over, I've seen how estate planning really pays off. I've also seen how devastating it can be when folks don't sit down and create a plan. That's why I'm so interested in getting a helpful brochure into your hands. It's called A Legacy to the World. It's free, and it's from Moody, folks you can trust. Call 1-800-621-7105. A Legacy to the World gives you some very important ideas that will help you learn if a living trust will benefit you. A living trust is an excellent tool for making sure that your assets are distributed just the way you want. So call Moody toll-free and ask for A Legacy to the World. It's free when you call 1-800-621-7105.
No one has to go through the days of mothering totally alone. As God points out in Isaiah 40, verse 11, He gently guides those who have young. Well, here at MOPS International, we work to express the Lord's concern for moms through the program Mom Sense. I'm Elisa Morgan. Join me each day right here for Mom Sense.
This is Midday Connection, second day in a 2-day series on healing from sexual abuse. And I'm going to give you the Moody Cassette Ministry again. If you'd like cassettes of both programs, you almost need both. 312-329-8010. Dr. Dan Allender is in the Chicago area for his Bold Love seminar tomorrow at Winnetka Bible Church. Those of you in Chicago can call the church for more information about that. His seminar on sexual abuse We'll be in Houston, Texas. Some of you Texas listeners might be able to venture over there, February 24th through the 26th. And I will give you a phone number for more information. March 10th through 12th, he will be in Orlando, Florida. We have a lot of Florida listeners. So that's March 10th through 12th in Orlando, and you can call. This would be your office.
Denver number, yes.
Yeah, in Denver. 303-697-6445. 303-697-6445. And we were talking during the break about a future program on false memories. That caller sort of unearthed a whole realm of questions and so forth. I just want one follow-up to him and the one before, and that is the family system. And I heard it in the caller before when she said, well, I don't want my husband to see my uncle and, think less of him or whatever. There's a lot of protecting going on in families and family systems. And what do you do?
Well, again, isn't it something of that peace at any cost? And that's why we have to have a redefinition of what it means to love. What does it really mean to love is to offer one another a taste of the character of God, which isn't always just a pleasant, let's have a pleasant time together. It also involves the disruptive quality of God's strength in our lives. Therefore, dealing with reality, not wantonly, not just saying, well, I'm going to share with you because this is who I am, but far more prayerfully, thoughtfully